People have been passing down stories from one generation to the other for many millennia. But at one point, someone thought to write it all down in a systematic fashion. But who? Did you ever think about who created history as a discipline, a science? Well, when it comes to Western culture, it was none other than the father of history himself, Herodotus. But he was not actually a historian. He was more akin to the modern-day influencers, the ones who like to travel around, meet interesting people, and talk about amazing things. So join me as we explore one of the OGs of influencing, Herodotus of Halicarnassus. Welcome to Lost History. Herodotus was a Greek who lived in the city of Halicarnassus, which was a part of the Persian Empire. Experts guesstimate that he lived in the 5th century BC because the one record we have of him is that he was sent from Athens to a new Greek colony of Histori in modern-day Italy. Assuming he was about 40-ish at the time, historians just eyeballed when he might have been born. So we actually don't know that much about the guy. Some stuff about him we know from his own mouth, or should I say, pen. So let's see what he says about the reasons for writing his magnum opus, called Histories.
Here is the account of the inquiry carried out by Herodotus of Halicarnassus. The purpose is to prevent the traces of the deeds of men from being erased by time, so that the fame of important and remarkable achievements produced by both of the Greeks and the barbarians does not go unrecorded. Among the matters covered is, in particular, the cause of hostilities between the Greeks and the barbarians.
Keep in mind, at that time, the word barbarian did not yet have the same derogatory meaning it has today. Barbarians were simply all the people that did not speak Greek. But the key word in this introduction is the term inquiry, because in ancient Greek the word for inquiry is historii. So this is the first seed of critical thinking about the stories of old and the events that supposedly took place. Before Herodotus, people just wrote the stories as they were told, blaming everything on the will of the gods. Like other writers before him, Herodotus also wrote about famous kings, queens, wars, and other events, although he often digressed. A lot. He wrote about topography and geography, mythical creatures, and at one point, he even gave instructions on how to capture a crocodile. Now that is something you do not expect to find in a history book. So, if you ever choose to read his histories, which I highly recommend, just keep in mind what I said about him being an influencer more than a historian. He even said that his role model was Herodotus of Miletus, and his works titled The Travels Around the World. So basically, you could say he wrote a travel guide. But now, let us delve a little into the histories themselves. The massive opus was divided into 9 separate books. Herodotus chose to name each one after the 9 muses. Clio, the muse of history, was his first book. Then came Euterpe, Thalaea, Melpomene, Terpsichore, Erato, Polymnia, Urania, and Calliope. I plan on doing a separate video for each of the chapters because I love bringing to life the voices of the past. If you are interested in watching that, just let me know in the comment section below. But let's get back to Herodotus. He was born and raised in Halicarnassus, a coastal city in the middle of major trade routes. It's very likely he grew up soaking in stories from every corner of the Mediterranean. But that wasn't enough for him. He started traveling far and wide, always on the lookout for juicy gossip and epic adventures. But as he listened to all the amazing stories, the historian in him didn't allow him just to listen. He was compelled to think about those stories and find the root cause of the events that transpired, and then he wrote it all down for the generations to come. To be honest, it doesn't seem like he had chronology in mind at first. In his time, the Persian Empire was still a big thing, so he decided to compile the stories from the lands he visited in the order in which they were conquered by the Persians. But then, he intersperses that with a lot of anecdotes. That's why his storytelling seems so erratic at moments. The crux of his histories are, of course, the Greco-Persian Wars, and, even though he is obviously biased in the matter, he does try to write about great achievements on both sides. His work is a great source for the early origins of state cities like Athens and Sparta, the customs of Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and other peoples as well. But basically, the last 4 books focus on the most interesting subject for historians, the conflict between Greeks and Persians. He details the most important battles of the time, like Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plateau. He talks about military strategies and how a relatively small Greek army succeeded in defeating a much more powerful enemy. If you liked the movie 300, you have Herodotus to thank. In his work, kings are born and they die. Wars are fought until last man standing. People fall in love and give their lives for it. Countries rise and perish. But also, a dolphin saves a poet, ants the size of oxen dig up gold, and a war between griffins and cyclopes happens. Some later historians like Thucydides criticized him for not being more critical of his sources. But again, we gotta remember history did not yet exist as a discipline. What Herodotus did was to plant the seed of history and let the flower blossom. And one of the key changes Herodotus made was to place man in the forefront. He wasn't interested in gods, as much as he tried to explain why humans do what they do. Now, if you are looking for history served straight up, without flashy stuff, then you might prefer to read Thucydides. But if you are looking for a fun way to explore ancient Greece through epic tales and larger-than-life characters, Herodotus is your man. Just be ready to take it with a pinch of salt. For me, that's part of the fun. Because when reading someone's book, you don't just learn about what happens in it, you learn about the writer as well. Herodotus's tales revolutionized how people thought about history. Before him, authors were all like, "The gods did it, end of story." But Herodotus knew there was more to it. That is why his Histories isn't just a history book. It was a game changer that was to pave the way for future historians to strut their stuff. And another thing I like about Herodotus is that he was all about the people. He gave voice to the little guys, the underdogs, and the everyday heroes who made history happen just as much as the kings and queens. Even though his books were a massive hit, people did not yet recognize their true value. As I said, the title of Father of History was bestowed upon him centuries later by the famous Roman statesman and orator Marcus Tullius Cicero. And he was completely right. Herodotus was the first person we know of to write a narrative history of the Western world, and his name was thus immortalized.